This Shabbat is a very special Shabbat. This Shabbat is called Shabbat Chazon, Shabbat of vision. This Shabbat before Tisha B'Av is always called the Shabbat of vision. And there's actually two contradicting reasons why this Shabbat is called the Shabbat of vision. And let me share with you my screen so you could see it inside. Okay. So first of all, we now find ourselves in the period in the calendar, the Jewish calendar, known as the 3 weeks. The 3 weeks is a dark, terrible time for the Jewish people. Specifically, tonight is Rosh Chodesh. Tonight begins the 9 days. So the 9 days has certain restrictions. For example, no eating meat for the next 9 days. No weddings, no listening to music. If you have surgeries, don't schedule it for now. Try at least if you want to try your luck with something like invest in a new stock. Perhaps it's not advisable. If you want exact practical instructions about the 9 days, check with me afterwards. But in general, it's not considered an incredible mazel dika time for the Jewish people. So look at text number 1. The Shulchan Aruch in front of us says, "Miyudzayin mit Tammuz va'elech," from the 17th day of Tammuz for 3 weeks. Maftirim gimel in Puranuta. The Haftarah is the 3 Haftarot of rebuke, Divrei Yirmiyahu, Shimud Var Hashem, and Chazon Yeshayahu. So text number 2 specifically speaks about the reason why this Shabbat is called Shabbat Chazon, which is a Shabbat of vision, is because the Haftarah, the opening of the Haftarah of this book, begins Chazon Yeshayahu, the vision of Yeshayahu. What was the vision of Yeshayahu? The vision of was Shimu Shamayim, Asher Chazal Yehuda v'Yerushalayim, which he foresaw about the destruction of Yehuda and Yerushalayim. So you have it in the text in front of you. I'm not going to read the whole thing inside, but the idea is this is the reason why it's called Shabbat Chazon, because it talks about the destruction of the temple. Okay, and that is why it's brought down in Shulchan, in Minagim Harak, text number 3a in front of you, Bigdei Shabbat, when it comes to Shabbat clothing. Nahagu Rabotenu, our rabbis had the custom Ktsat Lishanot b'Shabbat Chazon to adjust their Shabbat clothing on this Shabbat of vision. They didn't typically dress in special Shabbat clothing in order to demonstrate some sort of sign of mourning. In other words, even though regularly on a regular Shabbat you're supposed to dress beautifully and fancily for Shabbat, nonetheless on the Shabbat of Chazon, we don't do it. So this is what's brought down. In other words, on the one hand, we find that this coming Shabbat is a terrible time, it's a dark time, is a time of mourning. On the other hand, we find text number 3b from Aruch HaShulchan, V'da she'etzleinu יש שניים או שלושה דורות שאין נוהגים כמנהג הזה בשבת חזון, אלא לובשים כל בגדי שבת. Some people, some of our rabbis, for 2 or 3 generations, the custom specifically, we do not show any sign of mourning on this Shabbat. וגדולי הדור שהיו אז הנהיגו כן, באמרם שזהו כמרים אבלו בשבת ובפרהסיה, we should not show any sign of mourning on this Shabbat in public, ולכן אפילו בשבת שחל בו תשעה באב ונדחה, even if this coming Shabbat would actually be Tisha B'Av, the 9th of Av, we do not show any mourning and we dress in regular Shabbat clothing. Not only that, we also eat meat specifically on this Shabbat, even though during the 9 days you're not allowed to eat meat. By the way, the Sfaradim hold the 9 days to begin after Shabbat, but according to the Ashkenazim, it's a whole 9 days. But in general, it's not a good time for the Jewish people. The text number 4 explains to us a whole different reason, a Hasidic reason, why this Shabbat is called Shabbat Chazon, the Shabbat of vision. And it's an exact opposite reason to the reason we just learned that it's talking about the destruction. So you can look at it inside. I'm just going to tell you the idea outside. Imagine you have a father, who this father has a precious and beloved child. So he buys him a beautiful suit. He gives the child a suit. And the child doesn't know how to take care of the suit, and he tears it. So the father sees this expensive suit being torn, but he loves his son, so he buys him another suit, another expensive suit. And the child doesn't know how to guard this suit, so he tears it as well. So what does the father do? He buys him a third suit, and he hangs it up somewhere, but instead of giving the child this suit to wear, He keeps it and he shows it to the child once a year on a special occasion. He says, when you learn how to behave, when you learn how to guard this precious, expensive suit, I will give it to you. So to God, he gave us the first temple, and the Talmud says, as I said in a shir, in a lesson here a few weeks ago, the Talmud says the Jewish people sinned with idolatry, adultery, and murder, and therefore God destroyed the temple. So what happened is God then gave us a second temple, the second suit. And because of sinat chinam, unwanted hatred one for the other, God took away the second temple. And then what he did was he rebuilt the third temple. But instead of giving us the third temple, he said, once a year, I will show you a vision of this temple. I will show your soul a vision of this temple, and you will be able to see it and appreciate it. And when you learn how to behave, when you learn how to love one another and how to care for one another, I will give you this beautiful, expensive, incredible gift called the third temple. And that is the Shabbat of Chazon, vision. We may not perceive it, but on this Shabbat, God shows our soul a vision of the third temple, and we enjoy it so much. So we find here in text number 5, Shabbat Chazon, hu yoter gadol b'ma'ala mikol Shabbatot hashana. Shabbat Chazon, this coming Shabbat, is the greatest of all Shabbatot, because this past Shabbat and all the other 52 Shabbatot, we don't see a vision of the third temple, but this Shabbat we do. So it comes out we have two opposing views, so to speak. On the one hand, we find that Shabbat Chazon is called the Shabbat of vision because of the terrible vision that Yeshayahu foresaw about the destruction of the temple. But on the other hand, we find the why is it called Shabbat Chazon? Because of the beautiful vision of the third temple that we will be rebuilt. By the way, all tsaras, persecutions, including the coronavirus, happen from God. And you actually see a proof for this in the text number 6 in front of you, Yirmiyahu. I'm not going to get into the details, but what suffice to say that the person who destroyed this first temple was Nebuchadnezzar, the king. It says in Yirmiyahu, Hineni sholech, God says, I am sending. Velakachti et kol mishpechot tzafon me'um Hashem, I'll take all the families of the north. Vel Nebuchadnezzar melech Bavel avdi, and I will take Nebuchadnezzar, my servant, and I will bring him basically to destroy Jerusalem, where God says, do you think Nebuchadnezzar destroys the temple on his own? No. It's me, says God. Every kind of tsaras comes from God, including COVID-19. And again, we don't know why, we don't understand why, we have no understanding why, but it comes from God. So how are we to bring together these two opposing ideas? On the one hand, Shabbat of vision is a terrible time where we see a vision of the destruction. On the other hand, we see a vision of the rebuilding of the temple. And it's here where we find a beautiful idea in Judaism. But to understand this, let's look at text number 14 from the Medrash of Eicha Rabbah. The Medrash tells us a story. During the time of the destruction of the temple, there was a Jew that was plowing. And suddenly his cow made a moo sound. There was a certain Arab there, and obviously the Arab understood cow language. Amarlo. So the Arab told the Jew, Yehudi, Jew, Hater paratcha ve'hater macharashtcha. Let your cow go unyoke her and stop plowing. Charav Beit HaMikdash, for your temple has now been destroyed. I hear from your cow. Your cow has stated that the most terrible calamity has befallen the Jewish people. Your temple has been destroyed. Gata parato shenit, and this cow now made a second moo sound. Amar lo haravi. So the Arab told him, now, kshor paratcha, you can put your cow back, or ton samatcha, and put your plow back, shenolad melech HaMashiach, because I just heard your cow saying that the Messiah of the Jews has been born. Tradition has it that when is Mashiach born? On Tisha B'Av. You see, if you look at Tisha B'Av, on the one hand, Tisha B'Av is a terrible, terrible time where we fast and we don't drink and we don't eat, and it's like Yom Kippur, and it's a terrible, terrible, terrible day, and all the worst catastrophes have fallen in this day, including the beginning of World War I, which heralded the Second World War, including 1492 when the Spanish Inquisition began and the Jews were expelled from Spain. Was 1492, Tisha B'Av. All the terrible, terrible calamities happened on Tisha B'Av. But on the other hand, Tisha B'Av is the day that Moshiach was born, the greatest of the great, the king, the person who's going to bring salvation to the Jews was born then. So how are we to make sense of this all? And the answer is like this. See, in Judaism, on the one hand, Tisha B'Av has an external layer and an internal layer. Externally, Tisha B'Av, what we see is a day of mourning. But internally, Tisha B'Av is the day that God began to rebuild the third temple. You see, when you want to build a building, you need to destroy the first one. So what God is essentially doing, he's rebuilding the third temple. How is he doing that? By destroying first the second temple, move away the second temple, and start rebuilding the third temple. So externally, Tisha B'Av is a day of mourning, but internally, God has been rebuilding the third temple for the last 2,000 years. It happens to be that God is a slow builder, but that is what God is doing. And look at the Rebbe's words in text number 16. Sie seien me'ein von dem Yom Shekula Shabbos. These Shabbats, which are during the 3 weeks, are a taste of the day that's entirely Shabbos, meaning the redemption. Was le'asid vet men sagen, in the future we will say, Oidcha Hashem ki anafta bi. We will say, thank you, God, because you were angry with me. As es wird nicht gale werden, die Pnimius am Meile von dem Onafte von dem Golus. At that time, we will understand the purpose of the exile, the purpose of God punishing us. At that time, we will say, thank you, God, for inflicting pain upon me. That's what I will say in the future. In other words, this is externally, it seems like it's been pain. It seems like Corona is a terrible, 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 terrible time, and it is. But when Mashiach comes, we will understand how Tisha B'Av is the greatest holiday, how Tisha B'Av Mashiach is born, how Tisha B'Av is the Shabbat of vision, because we see the rebuilding of the third temple. We will see how God has been rebuilding the temple for the last 2,000 years. Und euch der Ingen wird merumes in Nigle. This is also understood in the concept of halacha, and you can read this over here in front of you. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but the idea of no mourning happening on the day of Tisha B'Av. So Tisha B'Av is actually a juxtaposition. On the one hand, externally, terrible, terrible day of mourning. On the other hand, when Mashiach comes, we will say, thank you, God, for inflicting upon me pain. You see, we don't understand God's ways. We have no idea, no clue in understanding why God does, what he does, and when he does. But when Mashiach comes, we will understand. We will understand how this has all been for the absolute good, something that we do not understand right now. May we all witness the coming of Mashiach right now, and may we all see the brachot, the tremendous blessings that will happen and made happen right now, speedily in our days.